I want to make that. How many times have you said that exact phrase to yourself? Whether it's a movie look, a piece of fashion, or just generally someone else's outfit that you covet and want for your own. That isn't acquired by buying things on Shein and Wish that you really wish you wouldn't have. I'm looking at you, strawberry dress. This idea of desiring the thing that someone else has, or that you have seen on the silver screen, is not a new thing. From what I can tell, this has been going on since the dawn of time. Or well, actually, maybe it's more like you see the thing in Paris and now you want it, and so how do you get the thing from Paris to here? Or how do you get it from a movie screen to here? Well, some people conjecture that there were spies that crept around corners and stole designs and brought them back, which actually there is a little bit of reality to that, but it's all anecdotal evidence, so and I don't really have anything to back it up. But it's a really fun idea, because this is how I would think it would go.
Oh, he's doing his own theme music?
And while that may not be how it exactly happened, that's how it works in my kooky brain. But what we're gonna do today is we are going to go ahead and look at some of the favorite things that I have found from designers and from movies. And we're gonna go ahead and try and find patterns to go along with them. Vintage ones, of course. Now, if there's anything that you note or a pattern that you know of that would fit slightly better, or a modification that would work to make it look more like what the original was, always feel free to drop those in the comments, that way everyone can know. Because I don't have all the information, and I assume that ye olde internet has some ideas. Because we always do. And yes, I'm including myself in that. And we're gonna start in the 1920s. The Roaring 20s definitely had some fantastic fashion, although there weren't any particular movies that stood out to me that I needed to reproduce. So what we're going to be doing for this version is we're actually going to be looking at a couple different designer patterns that you may not have known were actually designer, because they like to hide it, because that's where the spies come in, because they couldn't actually label it as from that designer since they borrowed the idea, allegedly. And what better couture house to start with than the one, the only, House of Worth. While you may know Worth for their older fashions, such as the peacock gown and this black and white lovely thing that I don't actually know the name for, they actually existed all the way through 1956, which means that there were absolutely fashions that people could borrow. How many times can I say that in this video? And we think we found one in this Pinterest photo right here. Now, I'm gonna put a big disclaimer on this because this Pinterest photo is, 1, a Pinterest photo, 2, no source whatsoever and doesn't go anywhere. Without any extra information, we can just sort of guess that this is what they claim it to be. I'm not saying that it isn't, I'm also not saying that it is. But when you look at the first pattern that I found, it does tend to play into the idea that it could be exactly that. And that brings us to McCall's 50/50, which is this lovely little V-neck 20s gown from 1927. It has a pretty intensely shirred left-hand side with a fun little drape to go along with it that wraps around to the back. And the reason why we know that this is a Worth piece is because they actually outed themselves in their quarterly magazine, along with all the other people that they borrowed looks from. And this gown, while I didn't find a whole bunch of other ones that go along with it, it's not terribly difficult to duplicate, because the top section with the V-neck and the straight sleeves are pretty standard for 1920s patterns, but the real interest comes from the drape with the shirring at the left hip and the draping along the side. So it would be relatively easy to go from any of these 1920s patterns to the Worth gown. This is also available as a reproduction at mrsdepew.com in a paper or a PDF copy. Now moving into the later 20s, what we do see is a certain style, which I apologize, I'm going to butcher this. I want to say it's robe de style, because robe de style just sounds really garbage in American, so my apologies to however that's supposed to be pronounced. And one person that really did it well was Lanvin. Lanvin? Again, I'm not good at this. Well, what you can see here is a really straight bodice with a very dramatic skirt. And while I couldn't find an exact duplicate for this pattern, I did find something pretty close by yet another French designer, Agnes Drecoll. Again, my apologies for pronouncing that probably very wrong. And this one you can find in Pictorial 4178. And you can see here that instead of going up toward the bodice, the hip line comes straight across and then dips down. But it still has that super dramatic flare that I think if you wanted to adjust it just a little, you could do that. Now let's say you're not really looking to spend I'm sure, couple $100 on that pattern, Mrs. Depew has actually gone ahead and already digitized that for you so that you can go ahead and make your very own, either with a paper copy or a print at home. Now, I have not actually made any of her patterns yet, so I am just saying that these are where they're available from. I do not know your skill level or the skill level required to make this pattern. That is up to you, and if you have any questions, I would just go ahead and shoot her a message. And now let's go ahead and trot on into the 1930s. Now in the 1930s, we do see a pretty drastic change of the lines. We go from more of a boxy look to a very bias cut and sometimes extra frilly bits. And this is partially due to the influence of the movies. One of the first films that really created a craze for a certain style had to be Letty Linton, led by Miss Joan Crawford. Because let's just take a moment and enjoy this ridiculously amazing dress.
They tell me the female likes to be pursued by the male. So here I am.
Between the ridiculously frilly sleeves, the very slim line, and then a sudden jump out of the skirt as it goes down to do a swirly, twirly, flooshy thing. Those aren't words, but you know what I mean. This type of gown actually truly inspired a pattern craze for the large shoulders, for the extra frilly bits. And again, while I wasn't able to find this exact gown replicated in a pattern, I was able to find a couple of ones that get you pretty close. And one of the ones that gives you a good feel without necessarily holding exactly true to the lines, but is more accessible, is going to be Dubarry 901B, and you can actually find a reproduction of it at Lady Marlowe. And while I also have not made a pattern from her, I do know that it is at least a little more easily accessible than trying to find the original of this one, which can go for a few $100s. The one thing to note about Lady Marlowe's pattern, though, is that it is only currently available in a bust size 32. Now, the adjustments that you could make to make this more true to form for the movie, if you're really looking to exactly duplicate, is you want to make sure you add an extra ruffle right around the hip level. And then about 7 inches below that, you want to make sure that you're taking the skirt and kicking it out into more of a circular or A-line so you have more of that flair. You'll also want to make sure you add a couple ruffle tiers to be able to create the stacked layer that you see on her gown, as opposed to just the singular ruched and then oversized poof of the current pattern. Another option, if you should be lucky enough to find it, would be Excella 5101. This one actually has a poofed sort of sleeve situation already with one ruffle, which would be a little bit easier to sort of stack to more underneath. And the skirt already has that sort of drape down at the bottom that you wouldn't have to do much more, then make sure that you're adding that hip ruffle if you really desire that look. And from what I can tell for the stills in the movie, she actually looks to have like a collar of some kind with a little ruffle. Now let's say that you're not wanting to be influenced by the movies. Maybe you want to go straight from Paris to your wardrobe. Well, then that one you really want to look for something more like the lobster dress. Because yeah, I live in Florida. Of course I'm gonna bring up the lobster dress. It's amazing, and it's got a giant lobster on it. What can go wrong? Nothing. The answer is nothing. This amazing crustacean-based design was a part of a collaboration between Salvador Dali and Schiaparelli. Now this dress really was quite scandalous for a time, primarily because most of the layers were sheer. And what you can see is sort of an uneven waistband situation that kind of raises at the sides, and you can also see the very center front seam. And then it does look to have two different bodice sections, so you have an underlayer and an overlayer, and the same goes for the skirt, with a wide ruffle tier right along the bottom. And while I couldn't find anything exactly like that, there are definitely some 1930s gowns that you can take that and then make something very similar. And I personally think that Simplicity 2932 is going to be one of the ones that you can sort of get those lines with. Because when you're looking at it, it would be adaptable to the needs that you have. It does already have the raised waistband. It also has an overdress with a waistband accent that you could use that and then manipulate it to be a bit more curvy if you wish, or if you just want to be a little straighter, then that's the way to do it too. And you could attach that to the sweetheart style strapped bodice, but what you would want to do to create an exact duplicate is actually kind of even out that front instead of creating the two cups. Also, it's just a gorgeous pattern and I love it. And if you can't find that exact pattern, you really just want to actually look for early 40s banded waist dresses. Because this was made in 37, it was still pretty scandalous. That type of styling didn't take over the pattern world until about 39 into about 41, 42-ish before we get into wartime. And now we're going to go ahead and dive right into the 1940s. The 1940s definitely had a lot of upheaval, especially with all the rules and regulations that were placed around patterns and fabrics, just in general, clothing, for the war rationing efforts. And one designer that really took those rules and regulations and still created desirable styles is going to be Claire McCardell, especially with her popover dress. And what you can see here actually in the patent is a line drawing of how it was supposed to look. With her button side closure, she was actually able to get around the issue of a shortage of metal zippers due to the war rationing efforts. It also aligned with the appropriate skirt length and sweep that was put in place by the government. And while there are a couple good options for this, there isn't, again, an exact duplicate until she did another popover dress in 1953, which looks vastly different than the original dress. One dress that actually could have possibly inspired it, because it was in the 1941 Marion Martin catalog, is Marion Martin 2560. With its high crossover neck and belted waist, it doesn't quite have the exact line because the sleeves are absolutely wrong, because they needed to be just basically rectangles and actually dropped over the shoulder just a little bit. It's missing the singular pocket. So what you could do to change that is just go ahead and add the buttons, as you can see on the original pattern, and switch it out for square sleeves. Now there are definitely other ones from the 1950s that have gathered shoulders, gathered waists. There's also a New York pattern that actually takes the top and does more of a surplice top, so it's more of a V directly in the front as opposed to a cross and then down, all of which could either be modified or you could use it as an inspiration. And as far as movie inspirations, I don't know if you've been on this channel long enough to remember, but I love Casablanca, she says, looking at her 1940s sewing pattern video. I'll link it in the description below if you want to see just how awkward I was toward the beginning of this. Not that I'm much better now. But one of the most iconic looks that I can think of is going to be Ingrid Bergman's suit. And the suit in question is going to be the very last one right before she gets surreptitiously shoved on the plane.
And the names are Mr. and Mrs. Victor Laszlo.
But why my name, Richard?
Because you're getting on that plane.
What you see is really a single-breasted jacket with 4 pockets. Well, it could be 4 pockets, or it could just be 2 little flaps and then 2 patch pockets actually functional on the bottom. And then what you're gonna see is actually her skirt, which is your pretty standard 1940s front kick pleat skirt. So while the skirt isn't necessarily the most intricate part, you wanna look for a pattern that you can replicate the jacket with better. Because dear Elle, if you think that any part of this outfit is the same as what she wears, I would like you to go sit down and watch the movie again. Thanks. Or you could just hire me to go ahead and help you with these flat lays, because what you are creating is absolutely not the thing. That's not it. One type of pattern option is going to be New Style 3109. While it only has 1 button instead of the 3 that her jacket has, and it is missing the top flap situations, which are still dubious as to whether or not they're pockets, it does hold the correct line for the jacket that she has. Another option is going to be Simplicity 4800. Now with this pattern, you have a bit more of a rounded collar as opposed to the pointier one that she is wearing, and you again are missing the top flaps. However, I do think this is absolutely one that you could take almost in complete style and just use this as a dupe for her jacket. You'd also have to make yourself a pointy collar, white blouse to go underneath it, or a dickie if you don't feel like making the entire outfit. Dickies like that are readily available in books like Make and Mend for Victory, which if you don't know, I actually have a CoSy page, and what I will do is I will go ahead and scan some of those dickie patterns and go ahead and put them up there. If you'd like to, you can feel free to leave me a tip for my work, but really no pressure. I just want to make sure that if you are looking to recreate that Casablanca look, that you have the ability to do so. And I know I said I'd pretty much stick to 2 items per decade, however, you cannot go through the 1940s without mentioning Christian Dior's new look. Now, this is not the first time I have mentioned this on this channel, but it is a very influential style. What you really see is that nipped in waist, an accentuated hip, and a very full skirt on the bottom. Basically just kicking all of those regulations right out the door and moving on into a new decade.
Ha! Boom, baby!
And this, again, you really want to focus on trying to recreate the jacket, not necessarily the skirt. The skirt is a pretty easy, very full, gathered A-line skirt that's just make it as full as you possibly can and then twirl and you've pretty much made it. But really what you're looking for is the jacket. And to vaguely accomplish that, I found a few patterns. One of the first options is going to be New York number 2. The nice part about this pattern is that as for the secondary bar suit, not the original black and white one, but the cream and black version, this jacket is pretty close. It has the nice flat line right over along the bottom, and while things aren't in full princess seams like you can see on the bar suit, you could adjust those darts to be a little bit more accentuated to kind of make that look. Or you could just make it as is and call it good enough. That's what I would do. Another option for the jacket, at least as far as the body shape goes, is going to be Style 587. Now, I understand that neither one of these are going to be perfect, and this one's collar is definitely a bit more over accentuated than the notched collar of the white jacket. But you could modify the collar to slightly decrease the actual curve to kind of get you a bit closer to the look, but it's not going to be spot on. Now let's say you care more about the princess lines and the peplum aspect more than necessarily exactly how correct the collar is. Well, then that's what you're going to go for Simplicity 2182. With its over-accentuated peplum, and I do mean over-accentuated, that would be more of the feel that you're going for. If you wanted to create the secondary bar suit, you would want to actually flatten out that line. But personally, I think as long as you were to put a gathered full A-line skirt underneath, you could really pull off the bar suit feel without it being exactly a duplicate. And yes, that collar does actually fold down so that it does keep the correct lines. Or you can just leave it with a popped collar. Popped collar. And now let's go ahead and finish off with the 1950s. And what's interesting about the 50s is at this point you start to see a real blend of designer fashion and movie fashion being one thing and then pushing it into the pattern realm. One of the ways that you really see this is going to be in star patterns. They're much harder to find, but they actually exactly duplicate the looks that you would see in the movie. Unlike Hollywood pattern, which would just put a movie star's face next to a dress. Not necessarily an exact one-for-one duplicate of something they wore, but just to give it the feel of the movie sensation. This pattern line actually did hire the original designers to pattern out their creations. And one of the ones that you do see is going to be something like Star 41. This pattern is from the movie Here Comes the Groom, and she has this lovely black dress with tall cuffs and a little kick pleat extra spicy panel in the back that's a different color. Ooh.
Gentlemen, be seated.
And this dress was of course designed by the incomparable Edith Head, and so she actually created that dress and then created the pattern to go along with it. So if you're looking for direct duplicates in the 50s, you want to look for star patterns instead of the necessarily extraordinarily expensive Vogue Couturier and Vogue Paris originals that were really still focused primarily on the fashion industry and not the crossover of the two. And it just so happens that the next one on this list is also an Edith Head creation. We're looking at 1954's Sabrina. And yes, friends, I am talking about that dress that Audrey Hepburn wears with the cute little bows at the shoulder, the princess seams, and the very full skirt. One vintage pattern that you can use to create this is going to be Simplicity 3002. Now the items that you will be giving up are the princess seams, because this is just going to be a straight bodice with darts, and it has a gathered skirt as opposed to the A-line skirt. But it would give you a little bit of the design, and the other item that you're going to be foregoing is going to be that deep V back. Another option is going to be Advance 8293. Now this one does have the little bows at the top, but instead of keeping that straight line across, it does have a little bit of that boat neck, scoop neck situation happening here. However, you can do the very dramatic V-neck on this one, and it does have the very full A-line skirt look already prepared for you. So either one of these could absolutely be a dupe for it, but I think the advanced pattern is just a little bit closer. And heavens knows I can't talk about influential fashion and trying to spy and figure out how to do it without mentioning Marilyn Monroe. And while I feel like the white dress has been given all the press in the world,
That's a very interesting point of view.
Oh, do you feel the breeze from the subway? Isn't it delicious?
I wanted to focus on one of her other looks. I'm talking about the photo shoot where she wears this lovely blue polka dot number with Arthur Miller. And really what you're looking at is just a spectacular version of the late 1950s style. You still have the fit and flare, but you can sort of see like the gathers and the tiers are starting to come into a play. And there's also a bunch of piping throughout. And of course, that lovely, if I'm being honest, I can't really tell if it's a gather or a very well-placed pleat, but without being able to deconstruct the dress, and dear God, I don't know where it is, and I don't think they let me do that, we're just gonna go with Advanced 1977. It's going to be the closest that you're going to be able to get. Now, the main thing I do want you to take away from this is that this is primarily for the bodice construction only. To get the actual look of the tiers, all you have to do is make rectangles that you want your tiers to be, and then gather them down and then slowly increase them as you're making them so that not only do you create the flare look, but you're also creating that stacked gathered look as well. But I really think the bodice on this one is almost exact. I'm sure if I were to be able to get my hands on the garment and actually physically look at it to tell the differences, I could probably find differences, but really, this is going to be your best bet. And let's just say that you're not really looking to go for the exact and you'd rather just find a PDF version. It does look like the Vintage Sewing Pattern Company does have one that you could probably get pretty close to it. While it does look like you need to add a couple more tiers to be able to match it exactly, it does look pretty spot on and it's relatively reasonably priced. And in case you aren't following me over on Instagram, I have paired with the Quirky Turkey, a local Orlando brooch maker and jewelry maker, and we have created a beautiful vintage sewist brooch. It measures a little over 1x2 and is currently available on my website, backroomfinds.com, for pre-order for $30 US plus shipping. If you'd like to make a purchase, please know that all pre-orders close August 27th. That is this coming Friday. Happy sewing! Folks, I do hope you enjoyed this lovely dive into the world of vintage patterns, creating movie star and couture looks. If you did, make sure you're clicking that like button before you leave, being sure to subscribe if you want to see more vintage pattern shenanigans like this, and turn on the bell notifications, that way you know the moment that I upload. And until next time, stay beautiful, friends. Anyway, and I don't know where the clapper is, so we do this, because I'm partially a hoarder. Oh, said the quiet thing out loud. Okay, great. It's wrong. It's just gonna be strong and wrong. It's fine. And have I done one of hers? Okay, go look it up in your own YouTube thing, 'cause you don't remember if you made whose pattern you made. Nope, haven't done hers yet either. Okay, great. But what we're gonna do today is I'm going to go through, but in all seriousness, when you sit down to watch a movie, a TV show, a film, movies and films are the same thing. But what we're gonna do today is we are going to go on a diving adventure. Not that kind. Diving adventure? My child played the monkey bar so much that now she has blisters on her hand and her school is calling us for it. Great. Welcome to parenting. Enjoy. Well, that was a shit show that I don't have time to think about because I have to go edit it within the next 24 hours so that I can post it. What was I thinking?